big Foucault fan, is what you're saying.
Oh, I wouldn't.
Just does rails off the Foucault.
Right.
In your article, you critique harm reduction strategies as addressing the symptoms but not the root causes of drug addiction. You write, hiding behind similarly urgent humanitarian pleas, harm reduction advocates have cast their opponents as hard-hearted and urged their policies as an immediate response to the overdose crisis. Can you elaborate on how these policies, in your view, reinforce existing social inequalities rather than solve the crisis?
Right. So I think that the problem with harm reduction, and one of the things I want people to take away from this, one of the reasons this has become very popular in the United States is because it's very cheap to do and to
Mm.
administer. Handing out needles and decriminalizing drugs really doesn't cost the government very much money. It costs even less if you ship it off to nonprofits, which is 90% of who's doing the work
Yes.
in these harm reduction programs. So, one of the main things that has attracted people to this policy is that they can get it passed without a big fight over funding, right? So right there, I think you have the first problem with, most progressive liberal positions in the United States today follow the exact same trajectory, which is people reach for the lowest common denominator, cheapest thing to do, thinking that if we do anything, it's better than doing nothing, right? Now, the other problem with harm reduction, it's a separate problem, I think, somewhat unique to harm reduction. In most cases, those kinds of policies simply don't really do anything. They kind of just exist and don't fix the problem, but don't really change the conditions very much. With harm reduction, it's a bit different because we're dealing with addiction. And the thing about addiction is when you make drugs more available, and by offering free needles and decriminalizing, you are de facto greasing the wheels of a drug market. Now, if you're smart, you're saying we're doing that in a cautious way because we want to sort of avoid the worst of the drug war. But if you're not very smart and if you're not really sort of thinking through it, all you're doing is greasing the wheels of the drug market and expanding the population of people who use drugs, which is exactly what's happened everywhere these sort of minimized harm reduction policies has been tried. So now what you have is you've expanded the population of the drug market because you've said we're not going to criminalize drugs, so the penalties on drugs go down, and we're going to hand out needles and make drug use a little safer. So the risk goes down, right? So in Portugal, when they first decriminalized and started handing out needles, the amount of drug users went up pretty dramatically. Same thing in Oregon after Prop or Measure 110. Amount of drug
Goodness,
users
yes,
goes up.
yes, yes.
As a result, the amount of addicts goes up, right? Because once people start using drugs, if there's a larger pool of people using drugs, there's going to be a larger pool of people who get addicted to drugs, right? So now you have a different dynamic than you do with many other social problems, which is that by loosening the restrictions, you've created a magnet because addiction is magnetic, right? It pulls people into it and it continues to expand itself. So by greasing the wheels of the drug market, we're pulling in demand, we're actually expanding demand and getting people to want more and more drugs. So we're building up the demand for drugs. So in a way, it's very taboo to say in progressive circles, but I think genuinely that the harm reduction model, while I think many people come from the most honest, earnest, and moral place in advocating it, and I understand exactly why they advocate for it, I think it's not just not helping the problem. I think in many ways it's making the problem worse.
It's interesting that you say that, and I want to try to paint a picture for people, and I hope it's not too bleak. And I'm sure people are going to say, "Oh, these are right wing talking points." First and foremost, I lived it, I worked in it, um, I tried to create community within it, and if you haven't done those things, if you've just handed someone a sandwich or tisk tisked or handed someone a tent, we are not the same. Um, in these environments, you have to understand, especially when you have wet shelters, wet meaning drug use is permittable. To Dustin's point, you have now aided in a drug market because the dealers know where the addicts are. The addicts now have housing. One thing a lot of people don't understand with a large amount of homeless people is they do get money. Not a lot. It's not a lot, not enough to live on. In the Bay Area, it's nowhere near enough to pay rent. But if your housing is handled and your food is handled, now you have an entire check that can go to the dope man. Another thing that goes hand in hand with the dope man is the pimps. Um, and it's not the most fun thing to live around because where we were in East Oakland, where the shelters were, kind of everything got encompassed by that community. For the hotels that signed up for the program, there was one that didn't. One hotel was like, "F this! I don't want homeless people in my hotel." Um, and so that's where the pimps and the dealers would go because everywhere around them was customers. And it was so bad to the point where they literally broke through our fence to get to the people that they wanted to get to. And at a certain point, you get very apathetic law enforcement. And this was going on during a climate where everybody was anti-law enforcement. And you kind of have to start asking the question, well, how do you want to police this? And just to pull back even further, again, these aren't industries in which people want to work. No one is going to college right now to see how they can better assist the unhoused and drug addicted. That's something you fall into accidentally. I think I've said this on the show before. We had student nurses that were only there for a very short time. Once their time was up, they left, and then we couldn't get a nurse. We had one lady that stayed. She was like the main nurse, but we couldn't get any assistance. So it was one nurse for over 350 people. It's a lot of people to have nurse for. We had other nurses that were coming from the prison system, which one would assume was used to seeing a certain amount of humanity. No, they all left after the first day because they couldn't handle it. So again, it's not really a field, A, that's going to pay you that well, and B, that people are signing up to work for. That being said, when people were coming up, I wouldn't say in droves, but a fair amount of people were like, can we get an AA program? I was like, I'm sorry, we don't have anyone to do it. Now we don't have a budget for it, but we literally don't have anyone to do it. There is no organization that we can bring in here that can help you guys with addiction at the moment. We do finally have needles for you, though, of various gauges so you don't OD. But another big problem that we had, the first big problem we had with staff and the nonprofit was needles in general. I don't know if most people know this, but when you're done with your needles, you're supposed to get something called a sharps bin to put your needles in so you don't put them in a garbage bag. And when someone takes the garbage bag out, they get stabbed with a needle. You also can't tell people who all has HIV and Hep C and all the other diseases. So when the maids were taking out the trash, of course, needles were going through. A lot of needles were going through, and people quit. So you couldn't even really keep the staff that was there. And the nonprofit solution, as the staff was complaining, hey, this sucks. They were like, I don't know, get needle proof shoes. Go get some needle proof gloves. Apparently they have them on Amazon. I don't know what to tell you. Not our problem. And when I went to the harm reduction, when I first went to them, they were out of large sharps bins and small sharps bins. So I say all this to say I just want to paint the picture of what Dustin's describing when it comes to you're creating this environment. And this becomes the environment that everyone sees and goes, we don't want this near us. We want these people to get some kind of help, but not near us. So
Yeah.
I'll shut up now.
No, and I mean, I think, to put some numbers on it, one nonprofit in Philadelphia gave out over 7 million needles last year. 7 million. The population of Philadelphia is 1.2 million. So 7 million needles in a year. The population of Kensington, where this nonprofit exists, is about 20,000 people. So 7 million needles for about 20,000 people. When the city started getting serious about actually thinking about what it's going to do about this, the first thing they did was they were like, all right, well, let's look at where the overdose hotspots are. Where are people overdosing the most? Well, it turns out the overdose hotspots are every single place that there's a free needle exchange. And I mean, this should prove to people that the rhetoric of the kinder, gentler, like easier, weird, just letting people live their lives, and we're just trying to figure out how to like not like avoid the drug war, basically, is making the problem worse. It's allowing the drug dealers to basically have free reign because they know where the needle exchanges are. They know where people are getting assistance. They know where people are getting houses, and they just wait there and they prey on people. And like all markets, once they have the ability to expand and the ability to market themselves, you know, through all sorts of incentives and stuff like that, they're going to build a deeper and deeper entrenched kind of infrastructure to perpetuate themselves. And this is what's happened in Kensington. Drug dealers in Kensington brag all the time. They say, Kensington's the only place in America where you can wake up flat broke and have $10,000 within a day.
That was
I
a
mean,
crazy
that's
thing to read in your in your thing. Yeah.